Dear guests, Madam Acting Consul General, a warm welcome on behalf of Swissnex in New York and Swissnex Boston. I'd like to offer you the welcome and the thank you for being here tonight to participate in this event, Heritage in Peril, Digital Approaches to Preservation. We're delighted to be hosted in this august setting at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts. My name is Oliver Haugen, and I'm the head of Swissnex in New York, which has been a presence here in the city for about 6 years. So what is Swissnex, you may ask? Well, Swissnex is part of Switzerland's representation system abroad. It's an initiative of the State Secretariat for Education, Research, and Innovation, and it's managed in cooperation with Switzerland's Department of Foreign Affairs. In effect, Swissnex is the world's first science and innovation consulate. Its goal is to accelerate the exchanges of knowledge between Switzerland and the fast-growing tech and research ecosystems around the world, including here in New York. Founded in Boston in 2000, Swissnex also has major outposts in San Francisco, in Shanghai, in Bangalore, and Rio de Janeiro. So it's going to be my pleasure to introduce you to my colleagues. I'm going to start with the gentleman here to my right. Jonas Brunschwig is the head of our academic relations at Swissnex Boston and Swissnex in New York.
Thanks, Oliver. Thank you for joining us tonight. So tonight, Swissnex joined forces with the Swiss Touch campaign because of the leadership of the University of Lausanne, which is home to the Collart Collection, which is the world's most comprehensive archaeological archive of the Temple of Balshamin. While you will hear plenty more about the temple and the Collart Collection, I want to spend a few words about the Swiss Touch campaign, which is an event series and social media campaign that highlights Swiss innovation and creative ideas. And it has been running in the United States for the past couple of years, convening meaningful conversations and providing an enabling environment to seed new collaborations, very much in the spirit of what we're trying to do here tonight. In addition to Swiss Touch, I also want to acknowledge the University of Lausanne, the foundation of the University of Lausanne, Migros Culture Percentage, and of course, NYU's Institute of Fine Arts for hosting us tonight. If you want to be active on social media, the hashtags for tonight are Swiss Touch and Heritage in Peril. I also ask that you please silence your devices. And next up, I have the pleasure to introduce my colleague Alexandra Müller-Crepon, who is our head of Arts Plus at Swissnex, and she will tell us a little bit more about digital approaches to preservation.
A little bit, but for that we also have a fantastic panel waiting for us tonight. Hello everybody, my name is Alexandra. As Oliver and Jonas already mentioned, we at Swissnex are dedicated to working at the intersections of things, where ideas meet, where cultures meet, where countries meet. And mainly also, what gets us really excited is where disciplines meet and where ideas kind of morph into one. And that's why, as Jonas said, my title is Head of Arts Plus. Arts Plus, what is that? So in our arts programming, we're mainly interested in where arts and the humanities meet other disciplines, such as natural sciences or technology. And Patrick Michel's work, which he'll be presenting to us momentarily, is a prime example of that happening in Switzerland. In a project that is bringing both archaeology and the humanities forward, and also, co-developing new forms of technology. So there also, we're interested in that intersection and where that magic happens. So I'm very much looking forward to exploring how digital technologies are helping to preserve endangered cultural heritage with him and our other panelists tonight, which will be introduced to you momentarily. But it's my pleasure to introduce you right now to our moderator for the evening, Patricia Cohen. Patricia is a prize-winning reporter and author. She currently covers national economics for the NYTimes. And before that, before joining the business department of the paper, she spent several years working in the cultural department. So she brings a nice intersection to this round as well. Welcome, Patricia, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I started covering digital humanities as a relatively new field over a decade ago, and the work that you're going to hear about tonight was is part of the kind of projects that scholars at the time were only dreaming about could happen. So just to let you know, we're going to have two short talks tonight. The first is going to be by Isaac Ponte, who's a senior lecturer in digital culture and publishing at the University of Lausanne. And he'll be followed by Patrick Michel, who's a senior researcher and archaeologist at the University of Lausanne. Then we'll have a panel with a couple of other people for a half hour, and make sure to give about at least 15 minutes for Q&A. So we'll make sure to get some of your questions. So Patrick, Isaac, let's start with you.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here in that prestigious place to give this talk. Really happy also to open the way to the Palmyra project, which is really a important project for the University of Lausanne. The talk of tonight is about creating hybrids. You'll see that it's really a point that's really important for us at the university. It's also my first time in New York, and since I arrived, I had a lot of interactions with people telling me how important is immigration here, migration. This concept was really all around my way. And you'll see that it's also part of what we are trying to achieve at the University of Lausanne. So you've heard about digital humanities. We were talking to some minutes ago with another speaker that some years ago it already existed, and right now it's quite a buzzword. Actually, you know that for a lot of people, digital humanities is just humanities with some kind of fancy tools, and we have to convince sometimes our colleagues that it's not the case. I think you'll see that it's really not the case with that project of Palmyra. But a lot of people still consider us that way, that kind of people trying to mix different things. And they say, why does humanities don't just keep on doing what they're doing really well? And what they're doing well is simply doing, reading books and creating models and so on. And there is a huge risk here, and that's the risk we try to avoid at the University of Lausanne, is to begin simply to be data providers for engineers. And we try to change that, and you'll see that it's at one of the key points of my talk. So, because our tools mere tools, that should be one kind of position. But we know that tools create new objects. That's true for biology. It was true for biology first, maybe, but then now it's really true for the humanities too. And you'll see with the creation of the temple how it's important too. And we also know that objects create new cultures. I mean, we know also that novels come from a special kind of books, which is also one technological advancement, all right? So, and that's the point, how we get from this setting, this engineer setting, to creating a culture. And that's really I think, the key point of our proposition at the University of Lausanne. So it's leaving this space to go in this other one, that is working on a digital renaissance at the fullest of this concept. I mean, really taking the occasion to mix the disciplines, taking the occasion to mix the concepts and also the models. So, the question is, how do we achieve that? Well, first thing is to increase the dimensions of digital objects and methods. And that's really a critical point, and that's really something that you can find at absolutely every level of our teaching and also research and also projects. We don't want just to have unidimensional objects. And it's also strategical, because this kind of writing is quite repulsive for a lot of humanists. So when you want to get in interaction and open the doors, open the possibilities for this, and you don't want to get that kind of reaction, you have to change your mind. and that's the way also to get more people in. I mean, more students, more people, searchers, which maybe can stay out of the process. So to be more inclusive, for example, what does it mean for something like teaching? Well, if you want to teach programming, because we consider teaching programming as absolutely central, at least at certain levels, is yes, you can present it like a formal language, that's sure. But you can also present it as an act of communication, as a text, as a work of art, and also as a social practice. And this is absolutely central because it means then you can have different people intervening. So you can have historians, linguists, philosophers, social scientists, biologists. Everyone can work on programming with another point of view, and that's absolutely central. So, and you also can create new projects with this, new artifacts. Second thing is let researchers define their own needs in digital literacy. Again, it's quite simple to say, let's just create a framework and say you have to do programming, you have to do binary calculus, you have to do something in algorithms, in IA, and so on. But we selected another way. The other way around is maybe more difficult because you have more partners, you have to make more talks. It's more a Swiss way, we can say, to do the thing. But that's the way the University of Lausanne selected. So we were a lot of specialists from different faculties, and we made a framework. And we don't say you have to do programming. We don't say you have to do statistical analysis. We say, here are the different dimensions: data, practices, architecture, and also society. In your faculty, what kind of hybridization you can make? What kind of intersection? I really love this word. What kind of intersection you can do on this? So for example, if you're in archaeology, what is mixing data with practices? And you heard about this, creating models using new data, maybe creating models in 3D using drones and so on. Same thing for other dimensions. Third point is to support researcher crossing the borders. It's not really simple. It's different of culture to go interacting with, industry, with startups and so on. So you have to be helped on that. We have a service which is called PACT for technology transfer, which absolutely is there to help scientists, also the Palmyra project, to negotiate different points. Is it contract? Is it open access? Everything. Fourth thing, we have to collaborate with other institutions and help defining policies. You know, there is this kind of new phase right now that it should be possible to have a perfect algorithmic positivism. So this, again, this idea that data is sufficient. We don't have to request the help of specialists to define them. And you'll see that the Palmyra project is a good example which makes this statement false. So the project, the objective is to make university interact with industry, with cultural institutions, to have an impact on the society and to come back to university. In that situation, we also work with different parties to help our children, for example, to get acknowledged to that kind of concepts and technologies in a multidimensional way. So, and what's at stake? Well, destroy these boundaries between the literary ones and the art scientists, just considering that, you know, we are just speaking different languages, we are using different models, and yes, we create hybrids. And so maybe here there's a little question, is hybrid a new word for migrant? And aren't we promoting migration this way? Actually, yes, and we are really proud of it. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I really would like to thank all who helped us, Swissnex and Swiss Touch, to share tonight with you my perspective about the great archaeologist Paul Collart and about our safeguarding and 3D modeling project held at the University of Lausanne. And I also would like to thank the Institute of Fine Arts to welcome us in this beautiful place. And I'm really happy to see some of my colleagues and friends here tonight. It's a great pleasure. So Palmyra is an ancient archaeological site located in modern-day Syria. It was situated on the road between the Mediterranean Sea and Asia. That's the reason why it became a major trading post on the Silk Road. Being a crossroad, the culture of Palmyra is a mixed culture and features a multicultural society. The architecture is a combination of Greco-Roman styles with Persian and Arab elements. The cultural significance of the site is very important. So why it is an important cultural heritage? The combination of different influences in the architecture and the art of Palmyra gave birth to a characteristic art known as Palmyranian art. This art is especially recognizable in the funerary art, where vertical tombs were closed and covered by stone slabs bearing the relief of the dead woman, man, or a child. These portraits were composed as rich representation of human beings wearing jewelry both for men and women and precious cloth. In order to give the best image of it, the stone slabs were also painted. So UNESCO considers the site of Palmyra as bearing an outstanding universal value. During the Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, the so-called Islamic State, or ISIS, took control of the region surrounding Palmyra and declared it part of a caliphate or state under Islamic rule. In 2015, media reports suggested that ISIS militants has destroyed several important statues at Palmyra. A few months later, they reportedly destroyed the remains of the temple of Baal Shamin, before tearing down the ruins of the inner chamber of the Bel temple. Through the entrance and the ark remain standing. In addition to destroying the remains of multiple tombs, ISIS also tore down parts of the Tetrapylon as well as the city's ancient theater. The Baal Shamin sanctuary was excavated by the Swiss archaeologist Paul Collart between 1954 and 1956. The archive of Paul Collart is nowadays kept at the University of Lausanne. Since the sanctuary destruction by ISIS on August 23, 2015, the archive of Paul Collart has become the most important and complete documentation able to keep the memory of the monument alive, to ensure further investigation, to allow 3D modeling, and to help consider the monument's reconstruction or restoration, a still highly debated question. Why is an archaeological archive important? The importance of archives for archaeological research and field practice is undisputed in present-day archaeology. The broad definition of an archive could be archaeological records, including documents, finds, and museum collections. Archives are essential for historians of archaeology. The process of archiving is one of the most important features of archaeology, even if it has common practice to separate documents and artifact collection when archiving, when they should in fact be included in the archive together as equally important archaeological data. This great impact anyone who studies the past of a particular site, biography of an archaeologist, or the history of archaeology in general. In addition, the archive can work as a resource connecting past, present, and future of our discipline. Archive can also provide a starting point for further research. Archive finally should represent a prime research and a heritage asset. In the case of Palmyra, after the destruction of monuments and the pillage of the local museum, as you see here, archives, including photographs, drawing, plans, and inventories, are the only remain in order to keep the cultural memory of the monument, with, of course, the possibility to create a digital double of the lost monument, but also to estimate the feasibility of a reconstruction using technology to create a simulation of reconstruction or anastylosis. And another very important element is how an archaeological archive can help fighting against the illicit trafficking of cultural goods. After the theft in a museum or on an archaeological site, the inventory and the pictures produced by the archaeologist will remain as last proof for the artifacts of being part of a national collection. When heritage is at risk, working on an archive can give the possibility to preserve it and to find a way to pass it for further generation. The archive of Paul Collart, The archive of Paul Collart consists of thousands of pictures, hundreds of drawings, dozens of plans and notebooks. We nowadays have more than 8,000 documents, which are all preserved, studied, and used at the University of Lausanne. Our team in Lausanne is currently scanning and indexing all the documents and putting them online on databases. Thanks to the information provided, it is still possible to study the monument, but it will also be possible to identify the remains of the destroyed temple, all the blocks in situ. A few words about Paul Collart himself. So thanks to Henri Seyrig, that you see here, Paul Collart began his career in the Middle East in Lebanon. He actually digged first the monumental altar of Baalbek. And then he went to Syria. The Baal Shamin Sanctuary in Palmyra is located to the north of the ancient city. It is dedicated to the god of the skies, West Semitic deities. In fact, Baal Shamin means Lord of the skies. So this is a very big and important sanctuary, and people normally remember of the cella, but it was composed of several courtyards, a banquet room, and also a funerary complex just behind. So the god's character is known through the epigraphic material, calling him a supreme god. His Greek name is Zeus Hypsestos. Master of the word, he also governs the sun, Malakbel, and the moon, Aglibol, as seen in the iconography. As the master of the skies, he is depicted as an eagle with wide open wings governing the heavenly body. In the region of Palmyra, where the economy is fundamentally based on caravans, he also guarantees protection from dryness to the people, cattle raisers, or cultivators. He is also worshipped as an agrarian god. So the whole sanctuary, as I said, you see here a plan drawn by Paul Collart, is composed by the temple and 1, 2, and 3 different courtyards with the banquet room, a funerary complex, and several new elements through the time. The greater job of Paul Collart in Palmyra was that he was able to recognize among the latter Byzantine structures the blocks that belonged to the inner part of the cella, and that he reconstructed the thalamus with Syrian architects and archaeologists. So you see here the spolia, the part of the thalamus that was reused by the Byzantine, and Paul Collart, with the help of the Syrian architect, reconstructed the thalamus, which is it was really the most beautiful architecture element of the sanctuary there. The excavation ended, as I said, in 1956. Some years later, Paul Collart became the director of the Swiss Institute in Rome, and this is where he worked for the publication of his excavation. After Paul Collart's death in 1981, his heirs donated the University of Lausanne all their father's pictures. As former professor of classical archaeology at the University of Lausanne, Paul Collart wanted to leave his archive to the university, so pictures, drawing, plans, and notebooks are preserved and ready to be used. You just have here an idea of the catalog of sculptures and pictures that we have, the notebooks that we use, and of course the plans. So the project. After the destruction in Palmyra, the problem we face today is the documentation of the monument itself and of its destruction, the feasibility of a restoration or reconstruction, and the possibility of new archaeological research, but also that of the conservation of the cultural memory of the location. To address the problem, the project at Lausanne University aims to publish all the documents produced by Paul Collart and make it accessible to Therian authorities and researchers around the world. This project is a unique occasion to realize the value of an archive. We do not produce new data, but publish and make accessible useful information on a destroyed monument. Our archive contains unique documentation of Syrian heritage, and we also consider ethical questions on the meaning of our actions and the way we work involving local communities. The project enables the preparation for the future and future actions in the field. So members of our team digitize all the original documents, making them available on our online open access database that you have here. So this database consists of photos, sketchbooks, and notebooks in PDF format. Some of the available documents are still unpublished, and some have been used to produce the 3D model, like you will see. So this is just to illustrate how we work. I mean, we used hundreds of pictures and plans in order to produce the 3D models. What is also very important is that we try to work on the accuracy of the model. So you see here that we have more than 61 million polygons that were drawn manually by our team in collaboration with a French startup called Econem in Paris. And here you can see now the model. Where is it? So the 3D model will later be integrated into a platform that will allow items of the archive to be geolocalized, associating them with the architectural or archaeological objects that they document. So here you just have an example for an inscription, for example. So you will be able just to click on the map where the model will be and access all the document for the inscription, but also the copy and the publication when available. Another very important point is that we don't work on one 3D model, but on several in order to keep the whole history through time of the sanctuary. So, as I said, we first had in the 2nd century BC, so late Hellenistic period, a funerary monument, and then we have the cella during the Greco-Roman period and the transformation of the same element during the Byzantine. So going through time, we are indeed producing several different models. So to keep all the archaeological layers and the evolution of the architecture of the century through time. And another important point is using a specific algorithm, it will also be possible to recognize using facial recognition the blocks in situ. So this is a very simple example, the altar standing in front of the cella that you will be able to identify on the model as well. The whole memory of this area of Palmyra will be embodied in this scientific tool for research, and this cultural memory will be preserved in iconic images for future generations. Finally, as I said, working with inventories, we try to compare the Swiss archaeologists' records of the material in Palmyra and Damascus Museum with the updated inventories produced by our colleagues in Damascus. So we here use the ID object system in English, and then we will compare our inventories with the inventories that are actually made in Damascus and in Palmyra, and the missing objects will be put on the red list sent to Interpol. Because, as I said, this is the museum as it was before, and this is as it was after, and now it has been completely emptied, but our Syrian colleagues are still working on the inventories. So the valorization of our project Recently, we participated in the Old Age Cities exhibition at Institut du Monde Arabe in Paris. This exhibition is now in Bonn, in Germany, and it will be on display in Washington at the end of this year and in next January. In this context, a collaborative work with Ubisoft gave us the possibility to produce a VR experience of the Baal Shemin temple. Visitors have the opportunity to don a VR headset to immerse themselves in the heart of the Baal Shemin temple in Palmyra. So recreated thanks to the archive and the collaboration with Iconic and Ubisoft, this digital site reconstruction as immersive experience aims to raise awareness of the challenges of preserving fragile heritage sites thanks to the expertise of our team. Additionally, an international conference on Palmyra will be held in Lausanne next December with archaeologists from all around the world that have worked in Palmyra and with people working on the digital use of pictures and documents about the site. This kind of project would not be meaningful if not thought for and with local population. So aside from the scientific value of our work on the Baal Shemin temple, the aim of the digital double is also to keep the memory of the monument through its history, including the destruction. On the other hand, we have to keep in mind that 3D model is produced very far from the local communities and that the way chosen to keep cultural memory of the monument is paradoxically a way of dematerialization. Virtual is indeed not reality. Furthermore, we consider as most relevant to evaluate the social impact of our work with local communities. We therefore aim to investigate the mobility of memory in digital heritage reconstructions, as well as question the authentic transmission of memory via digital objects. The global crisis in human migration and displacement due to war, climate, and poverty has accompanied a rise in material and immaterial cultural heritage destruction. This situation has driven the urgency to deploy digital imaging and modeling as a means to preserve both historic monuments and objects, not only for preservation agendas, but also as touchstones for the collective memories associated with them. Despite the genuine potential for virtual models to be used as part of humanitarian actions for displaced people or for artistic adventures, they are nonetheless assets available for exploitation, and in some cases serving economic, nationalistic, or neo-colonial agendas. So this project we also translated into Arabic, and this booklet is on display at the entrance. Our work and a part of our documentation to work with the Future Heritage Lab at MIT in the refugees camp in Jordan. And that's also the reason why we joined the UNDP program, the framework concept of sustaining peace defined by the UN Security Council and General Assembly refers to a goal and process to build a common vision of a society, ensuring that the needs of all segments of the population are taken into account, which encompasses activities aimed to preventing the outbreak, escalation, continuation, and recurrence of conflict, addressing roots, causes, assisting parties to conflicts to end hostilities, ensuring national reconciliation and moving toward recovery. So in the aftermath of internal or external crisis, the social pact between a state and its citizens is weakened and therefore would need to be redefined and readjusted to the new situation in order to reinforce the community cohesion and sustain the peace. UNDP Syria is determined to follow a strict conflict sensitivity approach while planning and implementing for any activities. This approach is known as dealing with the past and is considered to be essential basis for a peaceful society and aims at establishing a culture of accountability, rule of law, and reconciliation. So based on our experience in the Palmyra project, we are developing a new project for Aleppo with the help of UNDP. So this is the exhibition that you will be able to see in Washington if you go there. And I was just show before concluding the model. I don't see the mouse on the screen. You see it, I don't. Thank you. So this is a photogrammetric work made by drone by our colleagues of Econem in Palmyra, and on it we put the model, so with no texture, so you can see the inside and outside of the temple, and this is what is actually on display. To conclude, I would like to underline how digital technologies are opening up exciting new opportunities. We will be able to achieve an understanding in 3D modeling of the change in urban conditions through the whole life of the Balshamin settlement, putting together the layers which make up the site in the correct stratigraphical and chronological order. It is important to demonstrate the changing character of occupation over time, also on a cultural level, because you have, the Greco-Roman period and then the Byzantine. We know also that we have the Jewish community there, and then you have the Islamic period. But it is also important to keep integrated records of the two-dimensional plan and of the pictures and drawing made for each layer and elements in the layer. We will be able to geographically associate a photographic archive linked to a specific context on the 3D modelized layers. Also, the archaeological finds, such as ceramics or coins, with their photos will be integrated in the platform. The developing of the project is due to chance of meeting with great people. The collaboration we settled around the world allow us going from analog archive to 3D modeler with IconM and Ubisoft. Our platform and databases are open access. It provides access to the records from any location on the internet. It is a great chance we have to help Syrian heritage to be preserved, but the open access policy is also an issue, as you get no control of whom is using the material. Furthermore, we have to face a certain lack of confidence regarding the long-term sustainability and reliability of the web-based resource for users. We hope to be able to link our databases with existing ones in order to develop cross-searching technologies and interoperability with other databases. The enhancement of security in response to developing technologies represent a responsibility and the cost in the project. We are producing now also a digital heritage, and we also have to think about how this digital heritage should be lost for decades. I also would like to mention finally that based on this project, as I said, UNDP is developing a new project, and we are very happy about that, because I hope this is the future, at least this is hope for future, and we thank you for your attention.
Okay, that's it. Okay, great. So we're going to start our panel, and joining us on stage, along with Isaac and Patrick, is Sebastian Heath, who's the Clinical Associate Professor of Roman Archaeology and Computational Humanities at the NYU Institute for the Study of the Ancient World, and Dominique Landvier, who's an author and expert of digital culture. And so, okay. And to turn these on, there's a little button at the bottom, so that's how you turn them on. So let me start. I want to pick up on some of the larger themes that you had in your talk, and the first goes to something you were ending with, Patrick, which was about open access, because I noticed even before that, one of the, just in terms of the principles you were talking about, was also protection of intellectual property. And so there seems to be a little bit of a tension between those two things, and also, as you were pointing out, some of the problems that could come up in the future. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we have to think about this issue. The thing is that as long as at the university we work with public funding, the policy is open access. So this is not a choice. We have to work in open access. The intellectual property of the model is something different, because of course it's a work shared with a French startup based in Paris. But also, I mean, the image, the photogrammetry was possible thanks to a collaboration with the Syrian government. So then, I mean, you have to deal with all these things. And I'm not really sure I have the answer how we can manage the issue we have. The only thing I know is that it's not a choice for us now to have an open access. This is the policy of the university, because we are working with public funding.
Sebastian, what's your take on this?
thank you for the presentations. No, I think it's it's an extremely fundamental issue. I will say something just flat out. I am an open access ideologue. However, I want to come into a situation like this and respond to the issues of the policy and the social issues rather than the technological issues, without asking anyone to put aside the consequences of those policy issues. So we have an opportunity to restore not just a physical space, but a human space, and to imagine about the intangible cultural heritage of how people use that and the sounds they made in there, all these kinds of things, which is easier to do if more people have access to the underlying digital data. So this is not to say, I can't believe you're not letting anybody just download the 3D model, but what are the consequences from an intellectual point of view as we were restoring what happened in the ancient world when we don't let everybody download the model? So I have no answer to that. What I find, if there is a middle ground, it is perhaps somewhere thinking about the new opportunities for new ideas about the ancient world that digital models are going to create. And as we generate the demand and as we generate the examples of new ideas about the ancient world that digital resources will create, that will hopefully incentivize everybody to break down the barriers as to who is using that digital data. So I can solve no problem here. I just would not want anybody to walk away thinking, oh, it's okay that not everybody can download this stuff. But that's so let's start with that and let's find a middle ground.
Dominic.
I totally agree with you, because the question is, to whom belongs the data of Palmyra? And there's only one answer, and the answer is it belongs to humankind. It is our cultural heritage. It is our history of all of the world, and I think everybody should have access to the data. And we have had this discussion in Europe all over, and there are some museums who are very progressive that say that we want that the people do not get some cheapo copies in low resolution, because if we are having the original of a painting, we want that people, whatever they do, they work with the best possible representation, and we have even the responsibility to make it accessible to everyone.
So there's 2 points I want to jump on that vein. The first being, and it's this booklet that you were talking about that you plan to distribute in the refugee camp. In a way, it's the democratization of this technology, which is, a very elite endeavor, and is it kind of happens in rarefied institutions like this one. And that kind of gets to your point, which is this is the property of all of mankind. So how do we navigate that space?
Well, I think it's absolutely a political issue. I mean, the border is not so far to cross, actually. Our conception is to say we have to give people the ability to talk with each other. So just giving, the starters, so getting used with that kind of technology, understanding the logic, which is quite common and can be shared, then is it possible to have, partnerships with industries and so on? But after this project with Palmyra, we are sure that students also will have new kind of contents in their teachings, because you identify new competencies that you can share. And sharing it also allows to then help those people to make the right choices, because we know that in society we'll have to make informated choices on this. And even on open access, we need really that.
There's also this colonial, post-colonial context. There's this famous example of the Nefertiti bust of the Neue Museum in Berlin. There is a digital representation of this Nefertiti statue, and a group of German artists, they released this data to the public. the museum was not amused, and it's pretty unclear where they did get the data from. They said they just digitized it by walking around. But they didn't want to make a scandal too big, because the underlying question is, when you have the Nefertiti that obviously belongs not to Germany but to Egypt, the question is, well, to whom belong this data? Why is the Nefertiti in Germany? Why is it not in Egypt? And then the artists, they actually pushed this question into the audience by releasing the data. Now they're free.
Why was the museum so upset?
You have to ask the museum, I don't know.
It happened 3 years ago, 4 years ago that it came out. I have that model on my machine. And of course, yeah, as soon as I could. And not only that, I asked my students to download it. And I asked my students to create a smaller version of it and to create a SketchUp model of it and to then go to the archaeological reports. I let them if they wanted to, and to place that model of Nefertiti into its original context and to explore what it was like to look at it as a child, to think about what it was like to look at it as a grown-up, as their virtual camera is going up and down. Like, great things happened in my classroom when I got access to data. And so, and I care about my students being able to learn how to do this. These are graduate students, and then they will go into their courses and their courses and their courses, and we'll have just a group of people who are really comfortable telling stories about the ancient world on the basis of rich media. There is no point to my story that is necessary, relevant to your experience of what it's like to manage the access to this. But yes, you know, there is no, one of the things I tell my students, there are no inherent boundaries to digital humanities projects, to digital projects. Take something like the model we see over there, and there are no topics that it does not speak to. There is no form of information that cannot be added into that model. But no one group can do it all. So who? We're not going to answer this question, but no good comes from not letting people access your data. Only, you know, good does, I want to say only good, people can come up with counter examples, but good things do come from letting people access your data.
I think there does seem there's somewhat of a consensus here about open access, and we've talked a lot and heard a lot about the incredible possibilities, intellectual and in terms of preservation, but let's look at what are some of the downsides, because, you know, virtual reality does not actually replace the destroyed art. And as we kind of immerse ourselves in every aspect of life, not just in terms of archaeology and our heritage, but our present day, this blunting of experience, people feeling that they have seen something, experienced it, even though it is virtual reality.
I mean, we have some studies about this topic, and sometimes it is the case. I mean, sometimes the replica gives you the same emotion. So in France, for example, there is the Lascaux cave that is very famous. It's not possible to see it anymore because it's too fragile and it's problematic. I mean, people going. And so they produce a Lascaux 2, and they are producing a Lascaux number 3. And people, I mean, knowing they are going to visit, I mean, to see not the original, but a copy of it, go out with the same emotion, saying, I mean, we saw this piece of art dating back to the Neolithic period. So another example would be dealing with transfer of cultural goods. Sometimes the museum doesn't agree to get artifacts back, but they agree to produce, for example, a replica, and the replica is placed in its original place. And sometimes it's worth for local population. It's enough to have the replica as keeping the memory of this history or the place. So yeah, virtual is not real, but on the emotional level, sometimes it works.
Dominic, I think you wanted to jump in here.
You know, in the context of media history, this question is raised for every new media, and I think it started already with the invention of the writing, that there was some criticism in Greek philosophy that when you start to write, you will actually damage your memory, and it went on. Of course, television, pictures, photography is a total disaster, and so on. So I think we have to see this question as a meme in the context of a discussion that is raised with every new media that has been invented. But I just want to give another example where no one will even dare to think about this or to ask this question. In this book, in this last volume of the edition Digital Culture, we also talk about the project in Germany of the Technische University of Darmstadt. They started 20 years ago to make digital models of destroyed synagogues. And now they have this huge treasure of three-dimensional data, which they just started a couple of years ago to transform into virtual reality models. When you go to New York, Jewish communities, when you go to Israel, to Jewish communities, when you talk to old people who have been experiencing the Holocaust, they just burst into tears when they get this helmet and they see they have this experience. I have made myself an experience with the synagogue of Köln. In one stage, in one moment, they told me I walk around, and in the other moment, they said, now you get another mode and you sit down. My feeling was that I was becoming a part of the community. I was not a guest, I was not a tourist anymore, but all of a sudden, I was really immersed. I think we have the unique chance to make people and to make experiences possible that would just not be possible without
I mean, it's a fascinating question of authenticity and not only in architecture, certainly in painting restoration. It's the same thing, this question of how much is the restorer actually putting their own artistic or aesthetic sensibility on when they're restoring a Renaissance painting or something even older than that. In Palmyra, do you think that one goal of this would be, okay, we have this 3D representation and that this will enable perhaps the Syrians at some point to resurrect and reproduce it? And if not, if those stones are missing, if they were destroyed to a certain extent, would it be acceptable to have modern materials replicate what was the ancient?
Yeah, so this is a big issue. I mean, first of all, we have maybe to recall the fact that all that kind of decision and discussions are framed by UNESCO conventions, and the lead of the reconstruction, if a reconstruction will be really done, will be done by and under the patronage of UNESCO. So this is the first point. The second point is working with digital gives you the possibility not to make a choice about what you would like to reconstruct. I mean, in our model, we are working on several different models across time. And so if someone would like to see how Palmyra, I mean, this part of Palmyra was during the Islamic period, Umayyad period, or during the Byzantine, it is possible. Now, if you think of reconstruction, the problem we face is, what are we going to reconstruct? I mean, Palmyra was already restored mainly during the 30s of the last century. And what does it mean restoring or reconstructing something that is or was already ruined? I mean, the monumental arch was heavily restored during the 30s. And so now people are thinking of the anastylosis because it was broken down by mechanical system and not using explosive like in the temple. So the blocks are still there and not too damaged. So mechanically it would be possible to reconstruct it, but we have to keep in mind that we have this image of the monumental arch of Palmyra only since 70 or 80 years. I mean, that it was, the shape of the arch was not that kind before. So does it...
That in itself was restored.
Is it meaningful to reconstruct an epinal image? I mean, this is not even reality. This is a reality of a time.
Well, but doesn't this get back to exactly this question that we were talking about before in terms of authenticity? I mean, what critics or skeptics would say is that some of them have raised the issue that the creators of digital reconstructions refuse to accept the fact that an essential disadvantage is the death of authenticity. And there's a fear that virtual images of cultural heritage objects may prevail over their real images of our consciousness in the future. And that's kind of exactly the point that you're making. And there's definite positives, Dominique, as you had mentioned, but there's negatives as well.
But there is a very philosophical question about what is reality. And I have some criticism on this statement too, because they refer to a reality that is as much a construction as the virtual reality is a construction. And what I find positive about the virtual reality is that everybody sees it, everybody knows that this is a construction. And I think one of the big advantages is that you do not reconstruct a certain moment, as you have to do in archaeology when you, go to Pompeii. Pompeii is essentially a Disneyland because Pompeii has been reconstructed for a couple of 100 years, and what you see now has not much to do anymore with the reality. So I think we have to talk about what is reality, and virtual reality, in my definition, is kind of a very transparent thing. And when you, in virtual reality, even have the possibility to show different stages of an object, it is pretty clear that every of these stages is a construction in itself. So I do not sign the criticism of the skeptics.
Sebastian.
Yeah, I got to jump in as well. The idea of a real image that's tough to support. Photography is itself an interpretation and a rendering, no less than a digital rendering of something. In my field, I'm a Roman archaeologist. There's an emperor Caracalla. People think he was a bad guy. Almost every image you see of him, the lighting will be from the top, and his eyes are in dark shadow, and there's this X across his face, and he just looks viciously angry. I encourage you, John, am I wrong? I encourage you to go across to the Metropolitan and Museum and see one of the most famous, well-known sculptures of him. And he's kind of got a little bit of a smile on his face. And on a bright day, there's not a shadow on his face, and he looks younger and happier than I do right now. So there is no real image. We have given to other people the agency in how we render something in photography by looking at it. And we just look at that picture and go, oh, that's what the thing looks like. That agency can be returned to us in virtual rendering to find more aspects of it. I don't know whether it's more or less real, but the optionality, the input of the viewer or anybody is an opportunity to return to the material of these objects that we have been at distance from because we mostly see them in photography. In fact, the more we virtualize something, the more we make its materiality accessible and different forms of its reality. So I entirely reject the question.
Isaac, this it kind of brings to mind something you said in your talk, which was about new technologies, in a way, create new objects and new art itself. I mean, the creation of oil paints, right, started a revolution in art. The development of the microphone gave us kind of the Frank Sinatra croon, which didn't exist, singers didn't really do that before. So is that similar in a sense of what's going on now?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think what we hear here is linked to what I said about models. I mean, when you're transitioning, when you're migrating from one field to another, or you're migrating through different representations of an object, you are putting the models first, because you're losing that thing that is reality. You have to consider the point of view. And that's what I consider really interesting also in that digital humanities. I love the way you talk about students doing things and inventing things. And I think we sometimes are too shy about this. being afraid and being maybe too respectful sometimes with those objects. And I mean, maybe being able to mix them, to revive them is another way to pay respect to something. So, and I think that the story of the digital objects and the digital dispositives is really as its beginnings, because we don't see computers. We have a lot of studies right now on video games, for example. And we know that some kind of video games are really linked, tightly linked to some kind of dispositives. So making the story of the dispositive in a way which is historical, or looking at the models, looking at the communities, the people around this, is rewriting a new story. So it's re-enchanting the object. It's not just engineering anymore.
Patrick, let me ask you, in terms of this project, how much of it did you feel you were kind of putting your own sensibility or aesthetic stamp on it versus, okay, I'm just following what the digital technology or the digital recreations are telling me, because, you know, these are the measurements?
So it's indeed difficult. What we try to do is just to work on the archive that we have, and using this technology like as a tool, and to give the meaning of the tool by a historical research. So this is the frame that we gave. So we didn't go further in the interpretation, or, I mean, the most important thing was to give sense, a real meaning to using this technology by the possibility of keeping this heritage alive, and also to give it back to the local communities. But yeah, there is always a risk, of course, to have a BA or whatever. So what we are doing now is, in our team, we will hire an anthropologist, because we have 3 questions. First one is the materiality, second one is the memory, and the third one is the mobility. I mean, we are producing a virtual model very far from the context, and we would like to give it back to there. And the other problem we face is that we would like to preserve something that was physically destroyed, and the only way we have now is virtual. So what does it mean? So in order to be able to see the social impact of that work, we will hire an anthropologist and have inquiries with Syrian refugees around the world to see how they feel about the work we do. Because, of course, our way of seeing our project and our work should be different from their own.
I think this is a very crucial aspect, and I'm really glad to hear that you're going back to the social context. We have seen this in the other example that have been mentioned tonight. This piece of the Nefertiti hack was actually, the idea was actually to give the Nefertiti back to the people of Egypt. They actually didn't want to give it back to the government for obvious reasons. And the other thing is the digitalization of the virtual reality models of the synagogues. There it is pretty clear that everybody in the Jewish community is vividly interested, for just a number of reasons, to have this. And that's, the question is it's almost not necessary to raise the question. But in the case of an archaeological artifact like Palmyra, this is much more, is very important, and I think it's very good to introduce this aspect, and also to keep in mind it for further projects, because it's not just about some isolated objects where somebody is making a nice scientific project, but it's about things that mean something to the people. And I think we have to talk about this, the meaning for the people. And in fact, virtual reality is a way that the people can really preserve and can live this meaning and can share it.
Let me just raise one more question before I open it up to the audience. And working now for a newspaper makes me perhaps sensitive to all the talk as we all hear about fake news. But let's move back to a sense, because of course we've seen governments rewrite history books and such. And is there something about safeguarding the validity or the veracity of the virtual reality? I mean, would it matter if somebody said, uploaded on a site, like here's all the database for the Nefertiti, but it wasn't really that statue, it was, you know,
Falsified.
falsified, and then it comes out and this is it, and goes out. You know, maybe that's just inevitable in the world that we live in. Is that a problem? Does that matter? Did I stump the panel?
Well, I mean, everywhere data are falsified, and that happened right before the digital period. I mean, look at the Soviet history books, that with every ruler, with every new president, they had new history books because they had to rewrite the history. And yes, it is possible to fabricate models that never existed, and I think this is maybe even easier than it was before.
Yeah, I mean, we have this whole issue of deep fake videos. I don't remember which politician it was who wasn't doing things, but this is in many ways a humanities problem. We need a humanities solution to what is a digital problem. It is not realistic to think that there won't be massive fakes of things. It is not realistic to think that there's going to be a clear boundary between fake and art. I don't know what, was Andy Warhol faking things or making art, and somebody who's more comfortable with modern art will be able to tell me more about that. And a deep fake could be a fantastic piece of art, and I would hesitate to want to decide that. So we need to bring those things into our classrooms and into our discussions and confront them directly. That's all happy and whatever, but it's going to be a terrible world. So I don't mean to be happy. I mean to say it's just going to be horrible out there, but we need to be able to face it.
Well, one of the other subjects that I covered, aside from digital humanities, was one of the biggest art forgery cases that involved a gallery in New York, where people paid literally millions and millions of dollars for all of these fake Jackson Pollocks and a whole other parade of artists, and it kind of raises the question. Well, it turned out it was this guy from China who was working in a garage in Queens, painting these works of art that people thought were worth $17 million. Well,
he was a real artist.
Maybe he was a great artist.
He was doing a great job.
Everybody thought they were that good. So anyway, with that, let me open it up to questions from the floor here, and I'll come around with the.
Couldn't the argument be made that the edifice with the best technology can own the construct, and what's the country, Palmyra city, that as history would repeat itself as the Nazis stole all the Jews' stuff without any repercussions? They still can't find that stuff to this day. And the Nazis claim, well, shouldn't the best technology, like I would like to see the cross-pollination between artificial intelligence and, say, archaeology and stuff, because you got to find it before you can, reproduce it and duplicate it and enhance it and preserve it.
Sebastian, do you want to take that?
Artificial, I don't.
No, not directly, so I'm not quite the right person to answer.
I didn't sufficiently understand.
Yeah.
Maybe you can
Okay.
just-
So I think basically the question was about, kind of this technology is that whoever has the best technology is going to prevail, and is that?
You're basically going around the edges about, the gentleman's project there. But I read an article on this previously. There's a lot of art over there. There are paintings. There are things that have been Now they haven't really discovered yet, because it's dark over there. They destroyed the whole region. So my question is that at the end of the day, it should be the best technology, one of the best tools, should lead the way, like a humanities Hunger Games, if you will, to provide the impetus for what we should be doing going forward.
Well, I think it's more about competition, let's say, perhaps, for creating or recreating these artworks that are either lost or missing.
Well, I think there was one aspect that was not maybe not stressed. It looks fantastic when I look at the virtual reality model, and then because people only see the end result, and of course there are lots of instruments, but I mean, besides the tremendous work of your institute, there have been two specialist companies. One is Iconem, that did the digital model, and then Ubisoft, the company which has a big name for games, who did the gamification, which means the possibility to walk through with the virtual reality helmet. And I think it's quite a long way to go there. And sometimes you might just get the impression that, okay, it's all easy, and in a year or two we'll have that as an app for $2. I'm not quite sure. There's a long way. This example with the digital synagogues, I mean, they have been digitizing, they have been making digital models for 20 years. And he says for one model, it takes about 2 or 3 or 4 months just to make the model. And then based on that model, you can make the virtual reality tour or whatsoever. It's a long way to go there. And I mean, it's a lot of work.
So it's actually a huge investment that the University of Lausanne has put into this.
I mean, it's only possible with collaborations. I mean, an archaeologist is not a graphic designer, and a graphic designer is a historian. So it's a transdisciplinary work, and that's why we have this international network, because one single person cannot do all. It's the work of the team, so it's a nexus of different and several technologies. And this is what is interesting in digital humanities, because it's when someone doing humanities is working with someone that has the technology, and how you give the meaning and the value using that technology.
Right. Another question from the audience? Oh, over here.
First, thank you for this. It's really inciting. I have 2 questions. First, is this digital preservation applicable for large-scale places, like if we're talking about cities? One good example is Mosul in Iraq. It's been like entirely damaged and destructed, and there are those lovely precious places from different religions, like Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And it's nice to see them again, if either in virtual reality or if it can be preserved well, because now people are working in order to preserve, but people as well, they need to live, they need to have a shelter, while they don't care what has been before. The second thing, can the digital preservation help people to rebuild, not only to have virtual reality, something to see, like for Palmyra or other places like Grand Mosque also in Mosul. It's nice to have it as a digital, but can this help UNESCO or those reconstruction organizations to rebuild things again, especially if the stones or the parts of that building is still there? Thank you.
Yeah, of course, the digital model is not only a way to see our work or to keep the memory, but this is a scientific tool that can be used. And that's the reason why we also work with UNESCO, because UNESCO is interested in having our documentation and using our model to see the feasibility of a material reconstruction. The only thing is that the university will not be engaged in the actual reconstruction, because it's too complicated, it's too political. But if UNESCO will or would like to use our work and the model to see the feasibility or to to see how many blocks, how many new blocks would have to be cut. I mean, this is possible. So it's a real scientific tool that is useful in order to study the monument, to keep its memory, but also to think about a material reconstruction. So yes.
Hi, sorry, perhaps this is more of a comment than a question. I work with UNESCO's liaison office to the UN here in New York, and there are a few colleagues here as well, and we're very pleased to be here, and thank you for holding this event, and it's great to hear such a good interest and to hear your work being reflected also in the work that we conduct in the UN, and particularly the perspective, as you also added, the social element to it. We've heard intangible cultural heritage preservation, all the different things that UNESCO has, conventions that work in an international scale, but in terms of really coming down to everyday lives is through universities in different centers and through activities from the private sectors and institutions like yours that this can really come to fore. And that's that one element there to keep in mind, as well as to kind of continue what Patrick Michel was saying, other than what an institution might wish in terms of reconstruction, but the linkage with the local population is extremely important as well. And perhaps here we can bring in that famous example of the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan that were destroyed by the Taliban at the time, where the local communities actually chose not to rebuild, not to reconstruct the time were the biggest Buddha statues in the world, but to keep the destruction there as a reminder of the tragedy that was. And there are holograms that they were put into place with a museum that was built, with UNESCO and Japan and different other institutions that have come along. Always very difficult, but at the end it comes to show that the digital is another element of the documentation, I think, as other speakers were saying, right? We used to document everything through notes, as we saw in the professors and the images, and now having these digital perspectives and 3D is something that is crucial for future generations, for the preservation of humanity's own heritage. So thanks again, and happy to continue the collaboration with all the institutions from UNESCO's perspective. Thank you.
To break this one. Okay, here. And to piggyback on top of that, who is the legitimate person, the government, the people, to make that decision, whether you're going to rebuild, whether it's a city like Mosul or the Buddhist, or whether it should be a monument? So when we talk about sharing with the people, who are the stakeholders that actually get to make the decision?
I mean, the process is quite complicated, but as long as a country sign an international convention, if it's at UNESCO, so it's UNESCO. So normally about heritage, word heritage, and Palmyra is on the list on the word heritage, it's UNESCO, and Syria has signed the 1970 convention, International Convention of UNESCO. I do thank you, sir, for your remark. There is another part of the project I was not able to show tonight. We had a lecture and a workshop yesterday in Boston, and we also use, we produced this booklet, and inside this booklet you have embroideries, patterns that are created using the ornamental element of the Baal Shemin temple, and we created activities linking tangible and intangible heritage for Syrian refugees in the Azraq camp in Jordan. So this is also something, it's not only to send this 3D model there or to send this brochure and this booklet written in Arabic to help people to understand and to keep this link with their own heritage, but also created action and activities that allow people in a transgenerational activities with old people and young people, to create activities like embroidery, linking these two different elements that tells the real story. Also because Palmyra, as I said, was on the Silk Road, and the industry of textile was very important at that time there. So it's meaningful to produce such a thing, and I can after show you the first patterns that we created for embroidery, and we hope to have the next workshop in Jordan working with refugees there. So thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, if there is.
I actually have two questions, if that's okay.
If
they're not long
quick,
ones, though.
if
Okay.
they're quick.
Okay, so my first question is basically, nowadays we're dealing a lot with legacy data as well. Data sets that have become outdated, that are from software 20 years ago, and we're still trying to somehow revive them, trying to work with them. So my first question is, when is it okay to let digital data die? Why do we archive data? And what is the use of it? And in a lot of cases I find that, well, you know, we end up with a data set that's just taking up space on the hard disk, really. And it's in file formats that, you know, if you have some FileMaker Pro 2 version lying around, maybe, currently we're at 17, right? So you're not going to be able to revive that. So that's my first question, is like, well, okay, well, when can we let data die from an ethical point of view? My second question, a follow-up question, is then, okay, well, how do we teach those kinds of ethics? Because as we already mentioned, fakes, deep fakes, a lot of the advancements being made in computer science are through machine learning, deep learning, these kinds of really highly graphical sort of programming aspects, which you've seen a lot of examples of here. And in my experience, the computer science world does not really engage with ethics, and only now at Brown University, where I am, they're really starting up this idea, oh, maybe we should teach ethics in computer science classes. So this is another question that I have as well. How do you see ethics being filtered into your teaching and into your practices? Yeah.
Yeah, so first question, I think there is a true change. I mean, when you look at the, I don't know, 20 years ago or even 30 years ago, the question of preservation of data wasn't absolutely an issue. And then we have the web. I mean, it was common practice, for example, for people before the web, even to make cryptic code. When you were coding, you weren't documenting it because it was a way to secure your work. Because if you're the only person who can make the work good, then you're the only person who have to stay there in the company. So I think that the web and the new technologies, the fact that ID Object and so on are working on JSON and so on, the change of the format is part of a new view of this question. So I'm more optimistic than some years ago, even if we have still, I feel we have a lot of problems with consoles, for example, using, trying to revive some kind of video games, for example, because patrimony issue, it's also a patrimony issue. The second thing is, well, it's really difficult. I'm working on that since 2 years now. It's not that difficult when you have people who are okay to do it. I mean, when they are convinced that it's important, you can find solution. But it's really hard because I think we had, for example, when I'm talking with the engineer part, I mean, School of Engineers, and it's the first persons you call when you want to make new kind of programs, for example, for teaching for children. So what you do, you call those persons who are the specialists, and you have a huge bias there. The bias is that they're actually, most of the time, in a position, at least in my setting, trying to redo what they did. So, algorithmic one is absolutely important. You have to do data structure, you have to do and so on, because if you don't have that, you just can't do something serious. So it's about creating hybrids, and it's absolutely not easy, because when you see those people, they were, for example, in engineer schools, they made those kind of learnings, and they want to give the same thing. But and I think it's not so common in human history that you have a true change of competences which were some years ago absolutely fundamental to go a step beyond, now have switched to a place where there are top-notch technologies. So, you know, it was a prerequisite, and now it's something you even don't need. So when you want to create a program and to make room, for example, for ethics, you have to agree on the fact that, yeah, you have to go a little less far away, because you are considering that you can achieve more if we can talk together and go further. So it's a complete change of paradigm, and that's the renaissance, I think. And I also think that because you can open books of the 70s where people say, oh, informatics will change everything and so on. And you can open books of 90s and they say the same thing. And I think that why can we do something different now? Well, I think it's especially because we can give a multidimensional object. If we consider the informatic not just as a tool, but as a culture, and gather everybody around this, then you can make place for ethics and everybody's happy with it.
Did you want to jump
Just
in
very
quickly?
Very quickly add that no digital act is neutral. So nothing that we do online isn't a choice that we're making, even if we're not aware of what it is that we are not doing. So I would just mean that as something of a minor coda to what Isaac said. But if we are introducing our students or audiences, ourselves, to remembering that where we are trying not to project forward the biases or the problems that any topic of study has, as long as we are at least making an attempt to not project forward the sometimes not perfect way we have gone around studying the past. Digital tools do give us an opportunity to, since they are so wide open, trying to condense down what digital tools are so wide open that no digital act is neutral, and the possibilities of the inflection point that they offer us are really quite profound. And so even if you're just painting a stone a color, that is an active choice. And as long as people are coming to understand that, then we have a chance of seeing where.
Well, I guess that's it. So, well, let's continue the discussion. I hope that's not my phone. But let's continue the discussion next door for the reception. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Ken.